Broken Chains. A Paranormal Protector Tale. Book 1 in the Heart of Stone series. Written by Demelza, Carlton. Autonarrated by AI Charlotte from Google. 1. In Catena's perfect world, myths and legends would all be true. Somewhere out there, a fated mate was destined to find her. Men in power were capable of making good decisions that benefited more people than just themselves, and her research supervisor would actually tell her what to do for once, instead of magically expecting her to be able to pick the perfect PhD project. But her world wasn't perfect. Not yet, anyway. Professor Bishop spread his hands wide. The choice is yours, Catena. What sort of research project do you want to spend the next 3 years studying? Catena wished she could sink through the floor before the professor shouted at her for the reply she had to make. I don't know. What options are there? It wasn't like she could just pick anything. Archaeology wasn't exactly cheap. She had to pick a project where there was funding and a dig already planned. Well, there are a lot here in Western Australia at the moment. It's a good year for government funding. Fremantle Prison has 2 projects on the cards for the near future, the hospital and the commissariat. You could start your project before summer does. Or there's the East Perth Cemetery excavation for the new development. Or you could... He continued, but Catena's mind drifted. None of them really appealed to her. Worse, whatever she picked, she'd be branded an expert in that for the rest of her life. So it wouldn't just be 3 years of boredom on a project she had no interest in, it'd be a lifetime of dullness, digging things up she didn't care about. Not to mention she'd become an archaeologist because she'd grown up hearing all the stories about Maria's adventures around the world. Catena wanted to have her own adventures. Stories she could tell Maria about. Professor Bishop had evidently noticed her distraction. What about Aboriginal heritage? There are a number of rock art projects. Catena shook her head. Her family had migrated to Australia. It didn't feel right to be digging up Indigenous heritage dating back 50,000 years or more, when her family hadn't been in the country for more than a few generations. Maritime archaeology? There's a team starting to map Indigenous settlements on the seafloor, from before the sea level rise up in the Pilbara. Big budget for that one, with resource industry funding. I don't have my dive ticket, Catena said. Before the professor could remind her that she could have her scuba diving certificate in a matter of days, she added, and I'm scared of sharks. Professor Bishop frowned. So you probably won't be interested in the new Abrolhos study then. Cataloguing shipwrecks, oh wait. There's a land one in here, looking at the Batavia sites on one of the islands. No sharks there unless you go in the water. Wasn't that the island where a bunch of shipwreck survivors went mad and killed each other over food and water? She'd heard the place was as cursed as Tutankhamun's tomb. Then again, it wasn't like Catena believed in curses or the supernatural, so... maybe. It looks like that one doesn't have funding yet, still waiting on budget approval. Still, it's worth considering, so I'll leave it on the list. I'll send it through to your email, so you can have a better look before you decide. You've only got a month until the proposal deadline and you don't want to miss it, or you won't be able to get a scholarship. Not everyone gets one, you know. Competition is fierce, and the selection panel only approves the projects they think tick all the boxes best. And even if you do get a scholarship, only a quarter of PhD students actually finish their project on time and graduate. So it's important that you pick the right project for the selection board and the right project for you, so you'll finish it. Catena nodded, even as her tummy clenched into a terrified little ball. She had less than 4 weeks to make the most important decision of her life. And write a proposal that would convince the scholarships board to pay for it. Or she could stay an assistant librarian for the rest of her life. Which wasn't bad, but it was hardly an adventure. "I will have my proposal ready on time, Professor. I promise." And she would, because the last thing she wanted was for him to shout at her for not doing it. Or for anything really. Professor Bishop's volatile temper rarely remained calm for more than 10 minutes at a time. In fact, it was a miracle she'd managed to get through this meeting without him getting angry at something. Better not push her luck. She rose to leave. "See that you," he broke off as his phone emitted a sound like a police siren. He glared at it, then snatched it up and shouted, "You're not supposed to contact me. My lawyer gave you strict instructions." Catena fled out of the office and down the hall, but even outside she could still hear the professor shouting at his soon-to-be ex-wife about the disposal of their joint property investments. Half the campus probably knew about Professor Bishop's pending divorce by now, and if they were anything like Catena, they also hoped the matter was sorted and settled as quickly as possible. She only wished choosing a PhD project could be as simple. 2. Tor opened his eyes to darkness. Then he heard it again, the familiar scrape of stone on stone before it was lifted. Exultation flooded through him. Finally it was time. He would rise and answer the call. A scratchy voice echoed from deep in his memories, "When I have need of you, I will call, and you shall come. You will protect her and everything else I hold dear, for that is your purpose. Do you understand? When I call, you will answer." But the call did not come. Instead, a deep, bone-jarring vibration rumbled through earth and stone and Tor, rattling his very teeth in his head. He was not aware of its ending. Only that he could hear familiar sounds, the rhythmic beat of steel on stone, the clatter of cartwheels, the shouts of men, the crunch of stone surrendering to the superior force of a man, before the very ground started shaking once more. It must be the middle of the workday, with so much activity about. No wonder the call hadn't yet come, for he could not answer as long as the sun was in the sky. At night he would hear the call. And he would answer as he must. For why else had he been awakened, if not to rise and serve his purpose? Soon the sun would sink beneath the horizon and Tor would rise. In the meantime Tor closed his eyes. 3. "If you could just shelve those last few returns, you're good to go," Lillian said, gesturing toward the bin under the returns chute. The brimming bin. Catena sighed. She'd already emptied it twice, but today seemed to be the day every student had decided to return an entire semester's worth of loans, all in one hit. Exams must have started. Then again, shelving books was easier than dealing with panicked students at the help desk, who all wanted to shout at you if you couldn't magically produce the book they needed for today's exam. Never mind that they'd had all semester to borrow it, and now it was out on loan, they expected you to work miracles. Sure. Scanning the books into the system so the catalog would know they were returned took only a few minutes, but returning them took much longer, so that by the time Catena left the library and headed for home, it was already late afternoon and the sun was sinking fast. Winter definitely wasn't her favorite time of year. Luckily she lived close enough to walk home from work, and, luckier still, her street was still closed to car traffic because they were digging up the road to replace the water pipes. So where yesterday there had been a road, now there was a fenced-off dark ditch that stretched all the way down the street, stopping in front of her house. The excavator responsible for the chasm sat proudly beside it, within its fenced-off enclosure, as though if it were uncaged it would eagerly begin digging again, extending the trench to the next intersection. Catena hoped no one would release the beast until she was awake, or better yet, at work on Monday. Through the door, up the stairs to the landing above the ground floor shops, one more door to unlock, and she was home. Catena let her bag thud to the floor, too tired to carry it further than the entry. She could pick it up later. Fighting off panic at choosing her future research project and working fried her brain worse than doing multiple concurrent joint projects during her undergrad degree. Or maybe it was just manhandling so many books around the library today. She should be making dinner, but what she wanted was a hot chocolate. Opening the fridge, she reached for the milk that wasn't there. Shit. She knew she was supposed to pick something up on her way home, but, like so much lately, she'd forgotten. She glanced at the darkened windows. Surely she could wait until morning. But she'd need milk for breakfast, because she didn't do dry cereal. Or she could have toast. Nope. No bread either. Better add that to the list. Now she had to go to the supermarket. Luckily, it was still open. Judging by the slow-moving denizens in Coles, not unlike some of the mythical monsters she read about when she had time, she wasn't the only one who'd had an exhausting week. But she had every intention of escaping these zombies and having her hot chocolate, sooner rather than later. And with chocolate biscuits, she decided, snagging a pack of Tim Tams from the specials rack at the end of the aisle. Seeing as she was here, she should probably buy something suitable for dinner. Something she could just whack in the oven to cook while she collapsed on the couch. Even better if there'd be leftovers for tomorrow. Catena lugged her shopping basket to the cash register, and was soon swinging her fully laden shopping bags as she headed home. Why weren't the streetlights lit yet? She could barely see her feet in front of her, let alone where the footpath ended and the road began. Not to mention what lurked in the shadows between the shop fronts. She quickened her steps, offering a prayer to whatever deity would listen that she'd make it home safely. Which was probably about as helpful as hoping some mythical monster would save her, should she get into trouble. Or a good-looking monster hunter. She smothered a laugh. Maybe when she got home she should watch. She stumbled over something in the dark, pitching forward, but she managed to regain her balance instead of face-planting on the footpath. Hoping no one had seen her tripping over her own feet, Catena kept going. A shout erupted behind her. Hey! What do you think you're doing? You broke my guitar case and, did you just take my money? She glanced over her shoulder just long enough to see someone rise from where they'd been sitting on the ground, before she tucked her head down and bolted for home. Oi! You! Stop! You'd better pay for that. A woman alone, stopping at the order of an angry man in the dark? Catena wasn't stupid. Instead she ran faster. This time, when she prayed to whatever deity would listen, she had only one wish, for help. Just a little bit further and she'd be safely home. 6 more shops. 5. 4. 3. She looked up, her eyes straining to see the door in the dark. She almost didn't see the huge shadow beside it until it was too late. Easily twice as wide as she was, and so tall his head brushed against the shop sign suspended from the roof above. And when he stretched his arms out, his fingers surely touched the shop window on one side, and the construction site fencing on the other. No escape. No way past and no way back. If she could only get her keys out in time, unlock the door and slam it behind her. The keys. Where were her keys? Strong arms wrapped around her, pressing her against a chest as warm and hard as sun-soaked stone. He whirled her around, spinning a tight circle that only seemed to squeeze her harder, smother her, until she could no longer breathe, and blackness took her. 4. When the call came, it was not the sour, scratchy voice that Tor expected. Nor had he expected the call to come from a woman. Someone help me. Please. It was the barest, breathless whisper, but Tor heard it, for he was waiting. He shot through earth and stone, surfacing on a street that he neither knew nor recognized, but he cared nothing for the street. No, all his attention was on her, for the clarion call came from her lips as she flew toward him, as if her feet bore wings. Tor grinned. Her pursuer, the reason for her panic, approached. How dare he even consider harming her? Tor rose to his fullest height, his widest stance, the better to protect her. He swelled until he filled all the available space between the fence and the shopfront, so the pursuer could not pass. What did she want him to do? Tor listened hard, for her voice was still the softest whisper. "Please let me get inside," she repeated. Her eyes darted from him to the door and back again. Tor bowed his head in acquiescence as she ran straight into his embrace. His arms closed around her, followed by his wings. Never had he held anything more precious than her trembling form, and he would protect her with every part of him. Her pursuer skidded to a stop, the whites of his eyes wide with satisfying fear. "Begone!" Tor growled. The pursuer nearly dropped his guitar in his haste to turn and run away, back the way he'd come. A strange choice of weapon, to be sure. What manner of man wielded a guitar when attacking a woman? If he was some sort of musician, surely he would not risk the tool of his trade so. Then again, he was a fool for daring to chase her in the first place, when she had such a powerful protector. But perhaps he had not known? The musician, if that's what he was no longer in sight. Only then did Tor remember her second command: she wanted to be inside the building. He held tight to her as he threw his body at the wall, passing through it as easily as he'd traveled through stone to the street. He felt her slump in his arms. She must be a gentle lady indeed, to swoon. He'd best find her a bed, or at least a couch to lie on until she awoke. Though there were shops below, on the upper floors were bedchambers. Only one had books upon the table beside the bed, and clothes laid on the chair in the corner. This must be her bedchamber, where she slept. Tor unfurled his wings so that he might carry her to bed. Her scent seemed to fill the very air between them, winding its sweet floral fragrance about him as securely as any spell. He didn't want to let her go. She gave a little sigh, as if she shared the sentiment. But sentiment was all it could ever be. "I am your protector. It is my duty to keep you safe," he said as he laid her on the bed. He tugged off her shoes, then covered her with the eiderdown. The cloth had a strange design upon it, pyramid structures on sand, with a starry sky behind them, as lifelike as though they were real. Like a landscape painting some lord might hang on his library wall. Hardly something to decorate a lady's bedchamber. Then again, few ladies warranted an immortal protector, so she must be an unusual lady. Triumph welled in Tor's breast. He'd successfully protected her. Maybe not perfectly, but he'd gotten her home safe. He hoped she would see it so. If she rejected his service, she might command him to go back to sleep, never to wake again. He would have failed. But he had not failed. He would tell her so, and pray he did not offend her in doing so. "It's all right, miss. You're safe," he said softly into the darkness. Rustling from the bed told her she was awake. She stared at him for a long moment, before squeezing her eyes shut. Her whispered words carried to him, "Please be gone, please be gone, please be gone." If that was her command, then he would be obedient to her wishes. Tor faded into the wall, becoming one with the stone. He watched and waited for further commands, but she was strangely silent. She stared searchingly around her bedchamber, as if she did not trust Tor to have done as she asked. "You're safe," he said from the wall. "It's all right, miss, you're safe." She gave a little nod, as if she heard him and approved, before she settled down on her pillows and drifted off to sleep. 5. Catena woke in darkness, but there was enough light coming through the window to see that she was definitely in her bedroom. Perhaps she dreamed it all, the trip to the supermarket full of zombies, being chased home, and the hulking monster lurking outside her front door. Okay, put like that, she definitely dreamed it all up. It sounded like a mashup of several supernatural episodes, with extra zombies thrown in for spice. She should probably watch less TV for a while if her imagination was conjuring up such craziness when she slept. She must have come upstairs, decided to lie on the bed for just a moment, and fallen asleep. Wouldn't be the first time. "It's all right, miss. You're safe." Catena froze. The voice was male and definitely in the room with her. If there was a man in her bedroom, then no matter what words he said, she was anything but safe. There. A shadow in the corner, behind the door. Just as huge as the one she'd seen outside before he grabbed her. He lunged forward, then stopped in a sort of half-crouch that she realized was a bow, before he lifted his head to look right at her. Moonlight darted through the window and wreathed his face, silvering his dark hair. Yet when his eyes met hers, dark pools in the shadows of his face, something passed between them. It felt like understanding. Understanding that she'd imagined a man in her bedroom. She must be going mad. Catena closed her eyes. When she opened them, she'd see that there was no one else in her room, and he'd be gone. Please be gone. Her eyes popped open and she flicked on the bedside light. See. The corner was empty, with no shadows to be seen. She turned the light off, then snuggled back down under the quilt. The most sensible thing to do in this situation was to go back to sleep. She evidently needed it if she was hallucinating strange men in her bedroom. You're safe. See. Even her hallucinations agreed with her. Catena snuggled under the quilt, mumbling his words over and over to herself as she drifted back to sleep. 6. Work hard and one day you'll earn your freedom. Do as you're told and one day you'll be your own man again. Protect her and the property. The words swirled in Tor's head, punctuated by the clink of chains, faint memories that were all he knew of his past. Obey or he'd wear chains again. They'd lock him up forever and never let him out. But not if he protected her. Those were his orders, orders he wanted to obey. And maybe, just maybe, if he could please her, then she would set him free just like they'd promised. Because while he did not trust the voices in his memory, hers was not one of them. Instead, she was his future. A future where he swore he would keep her safe. 7. Between the sunlight streaming through her window, why hadn't she closed the curtains last night, and whatever it was digging painfully into her thigh, Catena was forced to give up on sleep. Sunbeams lit up the corner behind the door, chasing away any hope of a shadow, menacing or otherwise. Definitely a dream. Catena made her way to the bathroom, then stopped dead at the sight of her reflection. She hadn't slept in her clothes since, whenever the last time she'd come home drunk from some undergrad party, probably back in first year. Shit, she was still wearing her coat with yep, her keys, wallet and phone in the pockets. The keys were what had woken her up. She knew she'd been tired, but surely not so tired that she'd forgotten to take her coat off in the house. Could it have been real? No. It couldn't have been. Because, if it had, then there'd been a man in her bedroom last night. She rushed back to her room, checking in the cupboard, under the bed, anywhere that a creature as big as a cat might hide. She breathed a sigh of relief when no man materialized, only to trip over something on the floor where nothing should be. Her shoes beside 2 shopping bags. It couldn't be. And yet, she had to get the milk into the fridge before it soured. Not to mention all the other things she'd bought. Seizing the bags, Catena raced downstairs to the kitchen, then busied herself making sure everything went where it belonged. Creating order from chaos, everything in its place, just like in the library. By the time she closed the pantry door on the last pack of Tim Tams, Catena was pretty sure she'd figured out what really happened last night. She'd gone to the supermarket, been chased by a busker, brought her stuff home, and been so exhausted from running all that way that she'd gone straight up to bed and zonked out for the night. Then she'd had a bad dream, imagining there was someone in her room, woken up in fright only to find out she was alone, and gone back to sleep. Yes. It all fitted, all made sense. That long dark hair, those eyes that had mesmerized her, those strong arms that had wrapped around her had all been figments of her overactive imagination. And the remedy? She wasn't going to watch or read anything out of the ordinary until Monday. No werewolf fated mates romances, no Monster Hunter TV shows, no superheroes, no science fiction, nothing but contemporary romance and documentaries until Monday. Besides, she had her PhD project proposal to do. There was enough realistic reading to do on that to keep her busy all weekend. In fact, Catena grabbed a packet of Tim Tams out of the pantry, wishing she'd bought more. She considered heading back to the supermarket, but the thought of the angry busker out there, who might still be waiting for her, was enough to keep her inside for the foreseeable future. 8. Catena considered calling her parents and telling them she was sick, to get out of her weekly visit, so she wouldn't have to go outside her house and maybe see the mad busker again. But she was woefully low on food, and her mother had promised to make cannoli, which Catena couldn't resist, so the clock in her parents' lounge room was just chiming 12 when she stepped inside. It smelled like roast, but Catena had no doubt that it would be accompanied by some Sicilian foods that her father would insist didn't belong on the same table as a traditional roast. It had been an ongoing argument between her parents for as long as she could remember, but as long as he got his roast potatoes and gravy, Dad usually didn't do more than grumble a bit anymore. "Is that you, Cat? Can you come help me serve up?" Mum called. That was code for Mum needing to tell her something without her father or brother hearing. Catena hoped it wasn't because Dad had had another health scare. If the doctor had ordered him to change his diet so that he couldn't eat something he loved, Dad would be impossible at lunch. Luckily for once, Dad's health was fine. "Your dad's been taking his pills and his last batch of blood tests were good, so the doctor said he's allowed to eat normally again. Your dad decided he wanted some roast recipe he saw on some TV cooking show." If there was one thing Mum hated, it was being told how to cook. Catena winced. Mum only smiled. "I told him I'm too old to be learning to cook new things, especially dipping potatoes in duck fat or some such thing, so if your father wants to eat some recipe he saw on TV, then he must cook it himself." Catena choked. "So, your father has made today's roast, and I want you to make sure you say nice things about it. If it's terrible, don't look at me. I have a big pan of eggplant parmesan almost ready, in case you can't eat any of his things." "And cannoli?" Catena asked. "Of course. I promised. What with your dad doing most of the work for lunch, I had time to make enough for lunch and a box for you to take home. Enough to last you all week." 2 days if she was lucky, Catena thought but didn't say. Best her mother didn't know about her bad eating habits. If she knew she'd had a pack of Tim Tams for breakfast yesterday, or that she'd been chased down the street by an angry busker, Mum wouldn't let her leave after lunch. She'd insist Catena move back home, into her old bedroom with its pink suede single bed, as if she was still a child and not a grown woman about to start her PhD. Well, if she got the proposal in on time and actually picked a project. "So thanks, Mum," was all she said before grabbing a drink from the fridge and heading for the dining room, where she could hear her father and brother in the middle of a heated discussion about something. The oven timer shrilled, drowning them both out. "That's for you, Seamus." Dad broke off and came toward the kitchen, kissing Catena's cheek on the way. "Good to see you, Cat. You're right on time." Catena took a seat across from her brother, who was now intent on the screen of his phone. "How's things, Archie? You headed back up to the Minnesite tomorrow?" Archie didn't even glance up. "Tuesday, actually. My rotation changeover is on Tuesday. Then 2 weeks on site before I can come home again." Catena knew it paid well, but she couldn't imagine working such long hours, so far away from everyone and everything. She suspected he liked it as little as she would, but the last time she'd asked him, he'd snapped that it paid better than archaeology, which she had to admit was true. But there was more to life than work and money. With a lot more of Mum's help than Dad would ever dare admit to, he finally managed to get lunch on the table, and it wasn't anywhere near as bad as it might have been. Dad had followed the recipe to the letter, which had resulted in a slightly singed roast beef that was at least cooked on the inside, and a mountain of surprisingly tasty potatoes. Catena gave compliments where they were due, did due justice to her mother's eggplant parmesan, and barely managed to find space for some of the cannoli before she was too full to move. She silently thanked her mother's foresight for offering her a box to take home. She was just carrying the first armload of plates to the dishwasher when it started. "What do you think about this zero-emissions target thing? Sounds like a terrible thing for the economy," Dad said, cracking open another beer. "Only if you're a dinosaur like those fossils over in Canberra, who think the economy will collapse if it's not running on coal, like we're still in Victorian times or something," Archie snapped. "Well, they nix that carbon tax fast enough. If power bills go up, no one will be able to pay for it, and that'll make the economy collapse. Businesses will go broke." "No, they won't, Dad. Businesses, especially the biggest players like the mining industry, have been planning for this for decades. Hybrid cars, solar farms, wind, batteries, not to mention mining all the right materials needed to make those things. They don't want to be left behind, even if the government is living in last century. Even you're ahead of them, Dad, you've got solar panels on the roof." "Yeah, but are solar panels any good? We only got them because a guy at work knew someone who was doing cheap installation. And the wiring only lasts a few years, which isn't covered by the warranty, so we had to get someone up there last week to replace it all. What's the point of getting solar panels if they're just going to break?" "Dad, it's not the panels, it's your dodgy installer who's to blame. If you'd gone with the company I told you to." As the volume increased on the shouting match between them, Catena tucked the box of cannoli under her arm, waved her free hand in farewell, and headed for the door.